So good evening, everyone. I think we can go ahead and get started. We'll have we can get the welcome slide up. Thank you. So good evening. My name is Todd Horsley, and I am the director of the Northern Virginia Transit Programs for the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation, or DRPT for short. I want to welcome you all to DRPT's first public meeting for the I-495 Southside Transit and TDM study. We do have a Spanish language translation service available to anyone who wishes to use it. At any time, you can type a request for a Spanish translation into the chat box, and you'll be given directions for it. I also want to let you know that this meeting is being recorded, and the video will be made available on our project website. We will take questions and answers later, and we will note all comments. And while we will note all comments, this is not a formal public hearing on any project. Tonight, we simply want to give you a brief update on the work we have completed so far with regard to our study of potential future transit options in the I-495 Southside corridor, which you will hear is the southern portion of the Capital Beltway between the interchange with I-95 and I-395 in Springfield and Maryland Highway 210 in Prince George's County. The Virginia Department of Transportation, or VDOT, is currently conducting an I-495 Southside Express Lane study, which will be complete in 2023. The findings of our transit and TDM study, which will be complete later this year, will be used to inform the future highway alternatives that are being considered by VDOT in its study. Our transit and TDM study is a preliminary evaluation of current transit services in the corridor, as well as potential future transit services that might benefit from the addition of express lanes to the corridor. Our transit and TDM study will not choose transit services to be implemented, nor will it produce a transit service plan. If VDOT decides to implement express lanes in the corridor in the future, a separate planning study would be undertaken to develop a complementary transit service plan. Before we begin the presentation, I would like to acknowledge any elected officials who may be joining us this evening. And I just want to let you know that we'll give you an opportunity to address our attendees at the beginning of our question and answer session at the conclusion of our presentation. And looking through our list of attendees, I am not seeing any elected officials, but if I am missing someone, again, we will give you an opportunity to be recognized and to make remarks at the beginning of our question and answer session. So at this time, I would like to introduce our presenters for this evening, DRPT's Northern Virginia Transit Manager, Ciara Williams, and Tyler Badoon from Kimley Horn, who is assisting DRPT with our study. After our brief presentation, we will be available to answer any questions you may have, and we have a team ready to help answer those questions. We'll also listen to your comments at that time. So I will now turn this meeting over to Ciara Williams to start our presentation.
Thanks, Todd. Can we advance to the next slide, please? Hi, good evening. I'm Ciara Williams. I'm the Northern Virginia Transit Planning Manager for DRPT. As you can see, the agenda for this evening's meeting is on the screen. I will cover the study purpose and background, as well as the study process and the timeline for our study. I'll then hand it over to Tyler Badoon, who will go over initial observations from the baseline conditions. We'll also go over the next steps for the study. And then, as Todd mentioned, after the presentation, there will be an opportunity to provide comments or questions. Next slide, please. So the purpose of DRPT's Transit and TDM study is to identify current and future multimodal solutions that can be implemented in the I-495 Southside corridor to reduce congestion, improve trip reliability and regional connections, and enhance existing and planned multimodal mobility and connectivity. As Todd mentioned, this study was initiated because the Virginia Department of Transportation is conducting a separate environmental study, the I-495 Southside Express Lane study, to potentially extend the express lane system on the southern section of I-495. I do want to note that these goals in our study align with several of the goals on VDOT study as well. Next slide, please. So the study area, which is highlighted in yellow on this map, it includes 11 miles of the southern section of I-95, 495, between the I-95, I-395, and I-495 Springfield interchange in Fairfax County, Virginia, to the Maryland 210 interchange in Prince George's County. The study area also includes multiple rail lines in Virginia, such as the Metro Rail Blue and Yellow lines and the Virginia Railway Express, or VRE, or their Fredericksburg and Manassas line. Next slide, please. So as previously mentioned, this transit and TDM study is being conducted in coordination with the VDOT I-495 Southside Express Lane study. The VDOT study is being coordinated with DRPT and other federal, state, and local agencies in Virginia and Maryland. And I want to mention that the findings and recommendations of this transit and TDM study will be used as input to VDOT's Express Lane study, and will consider new multimodal travel options that could benefit from the reliability of an expanded Express Lanes network. Next slide, please. So in terms of the schedule, this study started in May of this year and is expected to be completed by the end of the year. The first task was to assess baseline conditions and needs. So input we hear this evening and that we received through our public survey will be used in this process. The study team is also starting to identify potential strategies using findings from the baseline conditions assessment. For the remainder of the summer, we'll be testing, refining, and prioritizing recommendations, and then a draft study report will be prepared in September. And at that time, the public will have an opportunity to provide feedback on the recommendations later this fall before the study is finalized. This study is also being conducted in coordination with a stakeholder group comprised of regional transit providers, transportation departments, and local governments. The stakeholder group met at the beginning of the study and will meet 3 more times, and you can see that shown on the purple stars of this timeline. And with that, I will hand it over to Tyler, who will cover the baseline conditions.
Thank you, Ciara. So as mentioned in that previous timeline, the first task of the study was to assess baseline conditions and needs of the corridor. So the key objectives of this are to identify existing and planned transit and travel demand management services, understand existing travel experience for the 495 Southside corridor and the travel options that are available, and to determine the top travel patterns that have the potential to support new or enhanced services along the corridor. The study team has been looking at existing and planned bus and rail service and previous plans that have been developed in both Virginia and Maryland as a starting point for potential future recommendations. Facilities such as park and ride lots, transit stations, and bus bays, as well as depots needed to actually run the transit services, are being looked at for future needs. Commuter assistance programs such as carpooling and vanpooling are also being considered that can provide alternative travel options. A travel patterns and demographic analysis are helping us understand where trips that are traveling in this section of 495 are starting and ending, and where future growth is projected that could support new or enhanced transit service. The changes of travel patterns since 2019 and early 2020 are also being considered in this analysis. So the transit services that are in or near the 495 corridor that currently exist are provided by several different transit agencies. Metrobus, shown in red lines on this map, operate across the study area, and this includes the only bus route currently crossing between Virginia and Maryland in this corridor, the NH2 route. Fairfax Connector, which is shown in orange lines on this map, and Alexandria Dash, shown in blue lines, operate bus services on roads parallel to 495, such as Duke Street, Eisenhower Avenue, Huntington Avenue, and Franconia Road. And they also operate feeder bus services to rail stations such as Franconia Springfield, Van Dorn Street, Huntington, Eisenhower Avenue, and King Street Old Town. Prince George's County, the bus, which is shown in the yellow lines on this map, operates service in the vicinity of National Harbor and provides Metro Rail connections to the Green Line. An Omni ride, shown in purple lines, operates north-south commuter bus along I-95 and I-395 express lanes, but does not currently have service on 495. The two other bus services shown on this map are Arlington Transit and DC Circulator, which exist in the neighboring areas of Arlington County and DC, but do not directly operate in our study area. The rail network is shown as black lines on this map, and that includes the Virginia Railway Express, Amtrak service along that same line, and then Metro Rail that operates parallel to 495 in Virginia. There's also a variety of commuter assistance programs that currently exist, but none are specifically targeted for this corridor. Next slide. The travel pattern and demographic analysis that has been ongoing has identified key activity centers and top destinations for current and projected future trips that would use the 495 corridor. The analysis shows trips are a mix of local and longer regional trips. And there are several top destinations that are very close to 495, in addition to others that are several miles from it. The top destinations that we've identified are shown in purple on this map. In Maryland, those include National Harbor, Oxon Hill, and the Suitland area. In DC, this includes the downtown core, as well as St. Elizabeth's and destinations in Southeast DC. And in Virginia, top destinations include Old Town Alexandria, the Braddock Road metro area, Eisenhower East, and Huntington. Further west, there's also top destinations of Landmark and Van Dorn and Springfield. And further northwest, off this map that's within view, are Dunloring and Tysons, which are also frequent destinations for trips that use this corridor. And finally, Hybla Valley and Gum Springs in the south on Richmond Highway is another top destination. So this travel pattern analysis that it's been conducted for the baseline conditions is helping the study team identify potential connections or destinations that could be served by new or enhanced transit service in the future. Next slide. So going forward from baseline conditions, this study will be evaluating potential mobility options for travel along the 495 Southside corridor. A few examples of what may be considered are shown on the screen. So transit strategies may include commuter bus service, enhanced rail service, local bus service, and enhanced facilities such as park and ride lots to promote transit use. Facilities needed to actually run the new transit services will also be identified. And examples of travel demand management or commuter assistance strategies are also shown on the right-hand column. This includes expanded ride matching assistance for van pools and car pools to make it easier for residents to identify partners for these services. And van pools are vans that typically start in park and rides and make one or two stops at a final destination. And there are currently a few van pools that currently use the 495 corridor. Another example of commuter assistance that could be considered is working with employers and residents to advertise travel options and assist with trip planning and incentivizing alternatives other than driving alone, as well as providing live transit and commuter information to travelers in a variety of ways so they can make informed decisions. Technology strategies are also going to be considered for both transit and TDM. Examples of this could be technology to prioritize transit at busy intersections, real-time information about transit service or parking space availability at park and ride lots, and other ways of using technology to improve the experience for transit riders. And the recommendations that come out of this study will likely be grouped in packages that represent different levels of investment or implementation timeframes. For example, what could be done in the near term versus long term. Next slide. So the next steps of this study will be to finalize the baseline conditions and needs assessment that I shared some of the initial observations from, using input that we hear this evening and that is provided through our survey, and we'll share a few different ways you can provide your input in just a moment. The study team will then continue to identify potential strategies for transit and TDM, refine them into recommendations, and evaluate them with study stakeholders. There will also be another round of public engagement later this fall, where you'll have the chance to review and provide input on the draft study recommendations. I'll now turn it back to Ciara to share ways you can provide input and stay involved before we move to our question and answer session.
Thank you, Tyler. So we want to know your thoughts. We want your input. You can provide feedback in several ways. You can complete a survey by scanning the QR code on the screen or by visiting our project website. That's http://bit.ly, that's bit.ly/I-495 transit TDM. The survey will remain live until July 31st. You can also email comments to me at Ciara, that's ciara.williams@drpt.virginia.gov. And then you can also mail comments to me at the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation, 1725 Duke Street, Suite 675, Alexandria, Virginia, 22314. Next slide, please. So to stay involved with the study, you can visit the study website, as I mentioned, for updates and additional resources. You can also participate in the fall public involvement opportunities. VDOT will also be holding their second round of public meetings this fall. And you can also contact us with any comments or questions that you have. And this concludes the presentation portion of the meeting. With that, I will hand it back to Todd, and then we'll move into the question and answer session.
Great, thanks, Ciara. I'm going to ask Mary Olivia to advance one more slide. I think we have our instructions. Yes, there they are. And there's also our Spanish instructions. Maria, do you want to read those? We had a suggestion in our Q&A that perhaps we read the instructions in Spanish. So if you want to read if you could do that, that would be great.
Just read the that we have an interpreter in Spanish. Sorry.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Un intérprete de español está disponible para esta reunión. Si tiene alguna pregunta o comentario, por favor comente en el cuadro de chat. Gracias.
Great, thank you. So as I said earlier, we will have a question and answer session right now. You can raise your hand to ask a question, or you can type one in the chat box, and we do have one or two in the chat box. But beforehand, I did mention that I wanted to again acknowledge any elected officials that may be on the line. I'm again scrolling through our attendee list. We didn't have any registered, so I don't believe we have any elected officials joining us tonight. But if you are a elected official, or you represent an elected official and want to make some comments, if you could raise your hand, that would be great. And if we don't see any, we'll proceed into our Q&A. Okay, not seeing any hands from elected officials. So Mary Olivia, we can either start with the questions that were in the chat box, or we can start with the raised hands. I'm going to let you kind of moderate from here on out.
Let's go ahead and start with the raised hand first. I just see one. So Mark, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you.
Hello?
Hey, Mark, we can hear you.
Hi, my only comment is, I would like you to consider, as they go through the process with express lanes, any opportunities to provide bus transit infrastructure, like a station kind of in interstate, kind of that can easily be connected to like the Eisenhower Avenue Metro to provide, quick access for people to access that area, that job center, while not having the bus have to get off and try to go to too many destinations. Give opportunities for potentially commuter buses, stop there quickly, then go to Tyson's or go to Pentagon or something like that from Maryland, or potentially have a connection between National Harbor and Springfield, and where you're not having to like get on and off the highway to be able to access different areas. So I think, I know they have some of those in Minneapolis, and I know they tried to put one of these in Lorton at some point with 95 express lanes. Just something to consider as an option for this study, to see what kind of opportunities that brings. And I'd also be interested to figure out, if you were to make Metro Rail free between like Huntington and King Street, what opportunities or what that generates. Because I know there's kind of a lot of connections, but they're 495 is a major barrier, especially trying to navigate those three areas when there's major transit stations and major bus service coming along Route 1 in Huntington. So just want to consider those type of options in the study, and to try to figure out how to make bus service more attractive overall, as opposed to having to get on a bus and go to like nice things like the NH2 kind of mills around like six different places in Alexandria to try to get to, and just try to make it create more opportunities to provide more frequency in bus service as opposed to trying to hit every single spot within an area. So just something to consider as you go through the study. I think adding more infrastructure with bus stations and things like that and more amenities there to create more opportunities, more frequency, I think is a good thing overall, and try to integrate it into any improvements that are done for the express lanes in those areas. So thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I don't see any other comments or any other hands raised. Do you want to go to the questions, Mary Olivia?
Sure. So the first, when will the recording be available? I can answer that. Within the next 2 days, it will be on DRPT's YouTube. The next question is, will you incorporate the findings of WMATA's 2015 Connect Greater Washington study and the more recent WMATA Blue Line Alternative study?
Yeah, I can take this question. So as part of the baseline conditions, we are going through previous plans and studies and incorporating findings. So yes, those are studies that are on our radar and we are taking a look at. And we are also actively coordinating with WMATA during this transit and TDM study. Their blue, orange, silver capacity and reliability study is currently still ongoing and expected to conclude after our transit and TDM study is completed, but we are actively coordinating with WMATA throughout this process.
Okay, the next question is, you mentioned baseline conditions. Can you describe further the future conditions you are using? Does it include COG and Prince George's goal of TOD build out and focusing on at least 75% of future housing and jobs growth at our high capacity transit stations?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So we are, as part of our future year analysis, looking at 2045, and we are using the MWCOG cooperative forecasts, the latest available ones, So yes, I believe we are considering that, and both Prince George's County and MWCOG are part of our stakeholder group and are collaborating throughout this process.
Okay, the next question is, how seriously is rail over Woodrow Wilson Bridge being considered?
So that is, I can start, and then if anyone from DRPT wants to add to it, that is something that is on the table as we go through the transit service potential recommendations. Part of that will be looking at the demand potential to support different levels of service, whether that is rail or BRT or bus rapid transit or commuter bus or local bus. So depending on the continued analysis and refinement of recommendations through this study that could be considered, but our study is not going to preclude potential rail in the future across Woodrow Wilson Bridge.
Yeah, I don't really have much to add to that other than we are coordinating with WMATA throughout the study. So.
Okay, the next question is, how are you getting the word out to the public about the study and driving them to complete the online survey?
I can take that, Tyler, if you want me. Well, I'll start and then you can go ahead and
Sure.
and fill in anything that I missed. So I know that the study team did have 3 pop-up events this past weekend, one in Springfield, one in Oxon, Maryland, and one in Alexandria. We got some pretty good feedback. We had about 100 people, I believe, fill out the survey on site, and then just provided information on our project website so that they can stay up to date with the study, with what's going on with the study. And we're also sending out information on our social media, on our DRPT social media, and directing them to our project website as well to fill out the survey.
We're also at CRO, just add using that stakeholder group that we're working with throughout the study to also spread the word out to their constituents.
The next question is, can you share any findings on current conditions, traffic levels, known gaps, or pinch points?
So our, for the transit and TDM portion of this study focused mainly on existing and planned services so far, as well as potential demand for transit services. The next meeting will have more details on results of the study as we progress in the months ahead. And the VDOT Southside Express Lane study is also looking at it from the roadway perspective at traffic levels, gaps, pinch points, bottlenecks, and things like that.
The next question is, can we sign up to get notices about the study?
Yes, I can actually, so we don't have anything on our project website where you can sign up and get newsletters, but I can make sure that we keep you involved in this study. And maybe, Mary Olivia, that's something that we want to think about, to have like a list where people can sign up and get updates throughout the process.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so the next question is, you mentioned rail and bus resources. What about bike and pedestrian network in the study area?
So as the transit recommendations are developed and we're starting to look at specific stop locations, that'll be something that's considered about, ensuring that there is networks to help people get to those services. And as we mentioned throughout, we are coordinating closely with the VDOT study, which is looking at some of those other multimodal connections for bike and pedestrian as well.
The next question is, have you posted a link to the survey on DRPT's website? Would be useful to have a more accessible public link.
We do have a link to the survey on the DRPT website in both English and Spanish, and I also just posted a link to the survey in the chat.
Okay, and the next question is, are you using as a baseline assumption for the future that the express lanes will be built when you calculate future rail demand, because the presence of express lanes can reduce rail ridership?
Yes, so for the future conditions, since this transit and TDM study is associated with the potential expansion of express lanes, that base future analysis would assume express lanes are in place for I guess non-rail modes to also take advantage of that reliable connection. So for the future analysis that will be done through this transit and TDM study, the assumption of express lanes in place will be used.
The next question is, regarding bikes and pedestrians, does that mean you are gathering information on existing trails, bike paths, etc., to include in baseline assessment?
I'd say to that one, again, some DRPT can chime in if needed as well, but as part of our baseline conditions, that was primarily focused on transit services and transportation demand services. The existing conditions of the bike and pedestrian network is more so being done as part of the VDOT study.
Those are all of the questions we had, and I don't see any hands raised, but please type your questions or raise hands if you have anything you'd like to ask.
I just posted a link to the project website in the chat as well.
And hey, this is Todd Horsley. Hopefully you can hear me again. I was unceremoniously kicked out of the webinar for some reason, but have now got back in. So, but it sounds like we're nearing the end of the question and answer. So want to thank our staff for taking care of that while I was unavailable. So, but please, if you still have questions or answers, let us know.
We have a raised hand from Stuart, so I'm going to unmute you. Stuart, could you please unmute yourself?
There we go. Fifth time's a charm. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Terrific. Thank you very much. I appreciate you guys doing this study, but I think based upon that last answer about you are assuming the express lanes will be built. I don't blame this on DRPT, but perhaps on VDOT. That's not the way to really analyze a corridor in a transportation study. And we have routinely asked for a transit land use, especially TOD, transit-oriented development, and TDM package alternative to be studied head-to-head against a hot lane type scenario, to look at the land use effects, look at the greenhouse gas effects, access to jobs, and so forth. Obviously, equity issues as well. And that makes this study a bit of an add-on, an afterthought. It presumes that you'll end up landing on buses because they can run in the express lanes. And if we build the express lanes first, they certainly can undermine the market for ridership on a rail line like Metro. And this will be the third time in this area where this has happened. The first was, well, not the third, but the third for this part of the Beltway. The original Beltway study ignored this type of alternative, and they did a separate study ordered by the General Assembly, which then got put on a shelf of rail alternatives. Then in the Wilson Bridge, we were promised Metro Rail on the bridge. They spent extra money to engineer it to hold the rail, and then conveniently forgot to follow up with additional rail studies, including an EIS for rail. We are now in the process with WMATA of a Blue Line corridor study, and their loop seems to pencil out pretty well for a long-term investment that includes the Wilson Bridge. Yet we may never get it. You might build the express lanes and then add this on. So I feel like it's unfair, and that we really should bother with this process if ultimately it's only going to be putting buses on express lanes that are already planned to be built. I'm sorry to say all that, but that's the concern I have about this. And rail and smart growth are not getting a fair shot here.
Thanks, Stuart. Certainly feel free to follow that up with that. I didn't really hear a question, so feel free to follow that up with a written comment to us. We'd appreciate it.
Yeah, we will. Thank you, guys. Again, appreciate everything DRPT does, but you shouldn't be put in a box. And the land use TOD, TDM, and transit alternative really need to get a fair shot.
I'm not seeing any other questions or any other hands raised at this time.
Okay, well, we'll stay on a couple more minutes. I will say we are admittedly pretty early in our study process right now, so we didn't have a lot of specific information to present to you tonight. But we wanted to get out to you early to get some comments. And August is a very difficult month to engage with the public in, so we wanted to try to get out to you before the August recess here in the DC area. But we will be coming back out for another public information meeting, another round like this, and I believe we're planning to have an in-person meeting in the fall. So there'll be additional opportunities to comment. And then we're also available at VDOT's public meetings as well. We're trying to be at each of those. If there's no other questions, and I'm a little handicapped right now, I'm on my phone and not able to see my screen, so I'm assuming there's no more raised hands or questions in the chat. And if there's not, then I want to thank everyone for participating tonight. And again, we will see you in the fall at our next public information meeting. But hopefully, we'll have some additional ways for you to comment and take another survey before then. So
there is one hand raised. It is Stuart. I think you can unmute yourself.
I took my hand down. I'm sorry. Don't want to hold everybody up.
Okay, well, thanks, Stuart. Thanks for coming, and thanks for attending tonight. Thanks everyone for attending, and again, we will engage with you some more in the future. So have a good summer. Have a good rest of your summer. Thanks.